In our module on music publishing, we spoke about how to properly set up our own sole proprietorship music publishing company in today's industry. The part about the general organization, taxes, and so on holds true for the general setup of a sole proprietorship micro indie record label as well. Also, let's keep in mind that if we are going to be selling recordings and managing music publishing, we don't really necessarily have to create two business entities, a record label and a publishing company. We can simply create just one sole proprietorship under one DBA name that does both things, publishing and record sales. Let's say John Smith Music. If we are going to be producing recordings as well, that too can be a part of this one company as a commercial activity. Meaning we can produce and sell recordings and publish music all under one sole proprietorship business entity. That way we have one name, one bank account, one set of expenses, and one set of taxes. Makes it much easier to handle things, at least in the beginning. If we decide to split it up into separate business entities later on, we can always do that. And isn't this possibility of handling music business across the board ourselves exactly what the contemporary advances in technology and communications brought about, and what many artists are doing or attempting to do today in the industry? Singer-songwriter who writes his own music, publishes his own songs, records his own music, and sells his own recordings. Or a music entrepreneur who produces and sells recordings and publishes music on behalf of his artists. Both running their own micro indie labels and publishing, powered by the internet and the online music market instruments and tools. Anyway, let's talk a bit about some commercial activities and issues of such a universal micro indie and of today's market paths, and build further on what we learned in a segment about setting up our own publishing. First of all, just like we have done with our own compositions when we talked about managing our music publishing, we need to register our recordings with the Copyright Office as well. To do this, go to the copyright.gov site and look over a document called Circular 56, which will take you through the whole process of registering sound recordings. If you're a composer and a recording artist and own both the compositions and the sound recordings, you can register both at the same time. Circular 56A on the copyright.gov will take you through that combined copyright registration process. Once our recordings are registered with the Copyright Office, and since we will be selling, streaming, and licensing those recordings, we have to make sure that we obtain our ISRC registrant code, and that we assign a unique ISRC for each of our recordings before we start doing anything in the marketplace. IRCS what? No, ISRC, the International Standard Recording Code, a code unique to each of our recordings, which will permanently identify it in the marketplace as our recording. It is used across the music market to identify a recording in sales, streaming, and in managing various rights and licensing. It can, and it most often is, embedded in the digital masters of the recordings in the mastering process, so it can serve as a digital fingerprint unique to those recordings. It is not only a useful market tool, but is also required by many online distribution and download services in order to do online commerce. So it is important that we do it. ISRC registrant code is what we need to get first before we can assign ISRCs to the recordings we own or control. There are two types of registrant codes: for those who own the rights to the recordings and for those who do not own the rights to the recordings. Those who do not own the rights to recordings and who need a registrant code are services that provide music production, duplication, distribution, and so on for the artists and the labels, and offer ISRC code assignment as part of their services. In the ISRC terminology, they are referred to as ISRC managers. Now, in our hypothetical case here, we own the rights to the recordings, so we are not interested in an ISRC manager's code, but a regular registrant code. By the way, the whole ISRC process we are talking about here is done online at usisrc.org. Anyway, the registrant code we obtain will be our company's code through which we can assign up to 100,000 ISRC codes per year. You think they'll do? I think we'll be okay with that number. Once we obtain our registrant code, then we can assign ISRCs to each of our recordings. And by the way, if we are going to produce music videos of our recordings and place those on the commercial market, we should assign a separate ISRC code for each of those videos as well, so they can be appropriately identified for different commercial purposes. Again, we can do all that on usisrc.org. The next thing to do is to register with SoundExchange. I remember SoundExchange, don't you? From our module on licensing of the sound recordings. Yeah. I know it was so long ago we spoke about that, the whole 2 weeks or so. Excuses. Okay, so to save you time fumbling through those course videos, and I know that you didn't take notes, or did you? Now that will be a pleasant surprise. SoundExchange is a non-profit performing rights organization for the sound recording copyright owners, collecting the non-interactive digital transmission royalties and the ephemeral recording royalties and distributing them to its members. Non-interactive digital transmission services will be services like Pandora or SiriusXM. SoundExchange is the only legally designated and authorized organization to perform such tasks in the United States, and as such it collects from about 2,500 digital radio licensees, has 27 international performance rights agreements, and distributes over $500 million of statutory royalties to the record labels and recording artists annually. I say we register with them, don't you agree? But seriously, it's the only way to get paid from all those non-interactive digital transmission services out there. And if we don't, we might be missing on an important income stream in today's industry. Just go to soundexchange.com and join as a copyright owner and as a featured artist, if you are a featured artist on the recordings you produce and will distribute, of course. Because just like the PROs that collect on behalf of the composers, ASCAP, BMI, and SESAC, remember? SoundExchange sends half of the collected royalties to the artists and half to the sound recording copyright owners, which is usually the labels. Since in our hypothetical micro indie, you have your own label here that produces and distributes recordings that features you as a recording artist, we would register the label as a copyright owner and you as a featured artist. That way, you receive all the funds collected and not just half. We did the same thing when we hypothetically registered with ASCAP, BMI, or SESAC, where we registered your publishing company as a publisher and you as a composer separately, remember? Once you join SoundExchange as a copyright owner and as a featured artist, make sure that you register all the recordings you control with them as well, of course. Okay, so now we have our recorded songs registered with the Copyright Office. We have the ISRCs in place for all those recordings. We are registered with SoundExchange as a copyright owner and as a featured artist. Plus, if we wrote those songs we recorded, and if we are managing our own publishing, like in our little hypothetical micro-indie scenario here, we have those compositions registered with the Copyright Office as well, back in our module on publishing. Plus, we registered our publishing company as a publisher and ourselves as a composer with a PRO separately and accordingly, right? This setup is not only a proper business practice, but is the only way to participate in many aspects of today's music market, and the only way to benefit from much of its income sources. Meaning, if we are doing the business end of music ourselves, it's not an option, it's a must before we start distributing, selling, streaming, and licensing our music.